So I'm going to go through a kind of story today about how we got to MC24 and the principles that it contains. It's a book of, it's really a kind of toolkit and a mindset. It's a way of thinking, a way of working, and a set of concepts, a set of tools to help anyone access the power of design in their life and work. This is the first paragraph of the book. It was written before the pandemic. It went to press just before the pandemic hit. And frankly, when it hit, I called the publisher and said, "Look, this is maybe too optimistic." And they said, "No, it's exactly what we need." But this is the first paragraph. Practically everything we do today needs to change. We're still doing most things as if we have unlimited resources. We behave as if nature is endless. We work as if waste is not a problem. We don't even see it as an idea. We don't think waste is something. We treat nature like a pantry and a toilet. We party like there's no tomorrow and pass the check to our kids. We dump problems we can't solve into places we can't see. Unfortunately, that's still our, out of sight, out of mind is still the way we work. And many of our solutions create more problems than they correct. In other words, we take problems out of context to solve them. And this is a kind of big theme in our work. We isolate a thing as if it can be discrete. We kind of create a solution to that problem and we think we solved it. And we don't really take into account all the ramifications and implications of that solution. I want to start with a little context. This is where we are in history. You can see that in the last 50 years, it's been an absolutely dramatic increase in quantity. We're now at 7.9 billion. We're going to 10 billion or so by the mid-century. And you can see where most of that growth is happening. It's in the less developed world. I like to say that we have success problems, not failure problems. We don't have the challenges we have because we failed. We have them because we succeeded. The red line in this graph is population. All the other lines are resource implication. And you can see that we weren't better people back then. We were just fewer. And that's really the kind of challenges we now have are a new order of complexity. The good news is that we won't solve the problems of the future with the tools of the past. This is the work of Ray Kurzweil. And he shows that by about 2025, we'll give you a device that has the processing power of a human brain for a price of an iPhone. And by around 2050, that device will have the power of all human brains. So you can imagine how we think, how we do business, how we see ourselves, how we engage. It's going to be dramatically different. The bad news is that we have real trouble happening. At the same time, we're looking at 10 years to avoid global disaster. And now on top of that, we have this. And on top of that, we have this. So that you end up with what I call the cluster, which is a kind of crisis stack. The pandemic on top of a crisis of racial justice, on climate, on food insecurity, on governance. You have this kind of level of challenge that the world has never really faced before. And what we see is that the common denominator to dealing with all of those is empathy. That the ability to actually see and experience someone else's problem is really the DNA of design. And so design starts with caring. It starts with trying to understand someone else's experience, someone else's problem. As a designer, I don't solve my own problems. Unfortunately, I deal with my clients' problems. And so this concept of caring, first of all, for the citizen, for their context, and ultimately their ecology, to really understand, you can't have a thriving citizen or consumer in a toxic ecology. Now, I've had, as was mentioned, I've had a practice over 30 years. I started as a graphic designer. I've done over 260 books over the years. But I've had, I consider myself one of the most fortunate designers of the last half century. I got to work very closely with Frank Gehry. I worked with MoMA to move them into their new digs. I worked with the Jets and the Giants to create their new stadium. And I was commissioned to do a 20-year plan for Mecca. And if you had told me as a young man, pay attention because you're going to have to design Mecca, I would have said, that you're cracked. That's not going to happen. But in fact, it did. My response was actually to design a 1,000-year plan because I said, look, first of all, it's Mecca. Secondly, if we design a 1,000-year plan, we can't possibly know the technologies that are coming. We will have to design an open platform, which is the best thing we could do. During that time, we saw a change in design from what it looks like to what it does, from a world shifting from an opaque world where you really couldn't see into things, you couldn't see through things. If a brand put up an image, that's what you saw. And these devices, billions of these things, our computers, all connected, created a world of transparency that obviously our political class still hasn't got the memo, but it's a world where we can see everything, and the idea that you can somehow have a photo op or hide things is really a thing of the past. What we saw really was design moving from visual form to what we call life-centered design. It's really about the whole picture. We did a project about 15 years ago called Massive Change that really was a kind of life changer for me. And the back cover says it best. It's not about the world of design, it's about the design of the world. It's about our ability to actually transform the world. And we looked at design through the lens of economy to say, let's look at design economies, the regions of our lives that are being transformed by design. Urban economy, movement economy, the energy economy, even the living economy. How are we designing life? And we organize it into a series of galleries that we designed. This is the image economy, the market economy. The market is not a natural space. It's a design space, and how we design it determines what has value and what gets exchanged. We looked even at the living economy, the design of life, and we discovered that in fact we've been at the design of life for thousands of years. If you have a dog and it's not a wolf, it's because we designed it for you, and that it takes us to a whole another level. What we saw in total was that we were actually in the process of redesigning wealth. That wealth, of course, is still measured in capital, but there's all new kinds of currencies evolving, and you can hear it in our colloquial language. We have wealth of information, wealth of access, wealth of mobility. New currencies that are being developed to kind of work this way. The whole project was based on this concept, this quotation from Arnold Toynbee, who said the 20th century won't be remembered. And this was 1957. Toynbee was a British historian who wrote a 20-volume history of the world. He said 20th century won't be about either political conflict and violence or technology and innovation. That the big idea of the century, in fact, will be that we dare to imagine the welfare of the whole human race as a practical objective. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that's the biggest idea I've ever heard. I think that's true. I think that's what I'm committed to. I think most designers, most entrepreneurs, most business people are interested in that idea. They're interested in making the world a better place for more and more people. And I decided to figure out, it was almost 50 years later, to figure out whether or not Toynbee was right. And it turned out to be so radically right that it's really stunning that it's not our common knowledge. It's not our common idea about who we are and what we do. And so when I launched the project that I just showed you, in Vancouver, I went to a high school to give a presentation and talked about those ideas. And I talked about the Toynbee quote, and a young woman came to the microphone and she said, Mr. Mao, I think you're not thinking big enough. And I said, tell me more, because most people don't accuse me of that right now. Quite the opposite. And she said, well, Toynbee was right for the 20th century, but for the 21st century, take out the whole human race and put in all of life. That's our project. And she really blew me away. I was like, wow, what kind of high school is this? It was a brilliant insight that was exactly right. We had a blind spot. She was right that the new idea of the 21st century is the welfare of all of life. How do we get all of life through the what E.O. Wilson calls the bottleneck? It led to this diagram, which was our kind of insight of the whole project, the most important diagram of the project. And it shows the transition from the old world to the new. That in the past, business was a subset of design. Design was a subset of business. Business happened in a cultural context, and culture happened in a natural world. The new world is that business, culture, and even nature are design projects. And that's what we're doing. When I first did the diagram, people said, Bruce, you're a megalomaniac. You just want to control everything. And I said, it's not about control, it's about responsibility. And what we see is that where we fail to design, we design for failure. And all over the world, where we fail to design our ecologies, we destroyed them. And we're now going back and recovering and redesigning the ecologies that we destroyed. We're planting 50 million trees in Africa. We're redesigning the LA River. We're redesigning the ecologies that we destroyed. That led really to the development of the practice of what we call life-centered design. And I'm on the board of a school in Northern Canada, in the town where I grew up, called the McEwen School of Architecture. It's a collaboration between French, English, and Indigenous leaders. And one of the projects that they do is they go into the forest with an Indigenous elder. They find a birch bark that's ready to give up its bark, in their words. And they proceed to make a birch bark canoe in the way that they've been doing for thousands of years. And they make that canoe, they launch it, they experience how, one of the most beautiful things on the planet. And when that's done, when the canoe is broken or no longer works, it goes back to the earth. It goes back to the forest floor and becomes food for the next generation of life. And I realized that they had a cosmology. They don't have the same way of understanding our place in the universe. They come to life at the center, not humans. They don't imagine human-centered design. They imagine life at the center, and we come to life with all the other living creatures. And it is a fundamentally different cosmology. And that's really the kind of foundation of life-centered design and MC24. So the question is, are there principles that we can apply? Yes, there are. We did this over a 10-year period to really understand what are the kind of core principles that will allow anyone to access this way of thinking, this powerful new design methodology. And I'm going to go through a few of those right now. The first is the first for a reason, because it really gets at design as a leadership methodology. In other words, if you think about what we can do as designers, we can envision a future and systematically execute the vision, which is the best definition of leadership that I know of. In our approach, we don't take inspiration as a side effect. We don't wait for it. We don't hope for it. We take responsibility for it. In other words, our job is to inspire and to show that leadership by envisioning that future. And I think most designers don't realize, most entrepreneurs don't realize how powerful they are in creating that vision. And that's really what the first principle is all about. You can't demand change. We built the sustainability platform for Coca-Cola. I can't make them do it. They can't make them do it. The CEO can't make Coca-Cola employees implement the sustainability platform. The only way to do it is to inspire them and show them a future more exciting than their past. And that's really what the core of design methodology is. This is the principle that is, in a sense, the most Copernican, the most kind of revolutionary in its disorientation of the way that we think now. And that is, we're not separate from or above nature. For thousands of years in the West, we've been told that we own nature, that we have dominion over it, that we are above it, that we're not part of it, we're actually above it. And the science actually proves that entirely wrong. We had the extraordinary experience of going into the jungle in Panama with a man named E.O. Wilson, who's probably the best life scientist working today. And he explained that there's only one thing on the planet, that's life. Life has an experiment going with form. We're one of those forms, nothing more. Nothing less, but nothing more. We're one experiment in a long history of experiments with form, 99% of which have already gone extinct. So what you see in the living world today is 1%. That's the beauty of this ongoing living experiment. That changes dramatically how we see ourselves, how we see our business, how we see our work. And then I want to end with this one because I think it's so relevant to this audience. Think like you're lost in the forest. The difference between an entrepreneur and the rest of us is mindset. This was really explained to me by a man named Rolf Feldbaum, who owns the furniture company Vitra. He explained that we were both entrepreneurs and we were talking about what it means. And he said, look, I'm like, as an entrepreneur, I constantly scan the world for opportunity. I'm looking for how I can advance my work. How can I advance my business? For me, the entire world is live with possibility and opportunity. He said, the non-entrepreneur in us sees the world as inert. It just is. They don't see its potential. And that's really the difference between entrepreneurs and the rest of us. The entrepreneur is lost in the forest. The rest of us are on a picnic. If you think about being on a picnic and being lost in the forest and the difference, you might be in the very same place. But if you're lost in the forest, you're scanning the environment for any clue that is going to help you live, that's going to keep you alive. You're scanning the world for opportunity and for utility. And that really is a design mindset. That's what designers do. That's really the way that we work. And for me, one of the best stories of Lost in the Forest is the Apollo 13 story. We're 200,000 miles from home. Their oxygen supply exploded, and they had to figure out how to get home, how to solve the problem with what was in the capsule. And there's an incredible scene in the movie where, in the Apollo 13 movie, where they dump out on a table for the designers boxes filled with everything in the capsule, and they say, you got to make this fit into that in a hurry, or these guys are going to die. And they made an incredible contraption that actually, and this is not the movie, this is the real Apollo 13 engineers showing the solution that they had created in that process. And for me, that concept of Lost in the Forest was the idea that we developed for the Institute Without Boundaries. I created a school called the IWB, and the whole idea was purpose-driven, experience-based entrepreneurial learning. And that is, you take on a really tough challenge that you don't know how to do together, and you solve that problem by applying the methodology. So it's not like I'm teaching you what to think. We are thinking and experiencing and discovering and inventing together. And the first project we did was Massive Change. And it's interesting to note that our startup business rate out of the school was 50%, which is tenfold what America's business schools produce. That we had a tenfold increase from 5% to 50% of startups.